The door to the conference room was already closed when I got there. I could see them through the glass. My stepfather at the head of the table, Derek leaning back in his chair like he owned the room already, and 3 people I didn't recognize in suits. I checked my phone. Wednesday, 2:30. I had nothing on my calendar. I pulled the door open. Everyone looked up. Warren's face did this thing it always did when I walked into a room he didn't expect me in, a microflicker of something, then smooth neutrality. "Maggie, we're in a meeting." "I can see that." "It's regarding the Weston account." The Weston account. I'd spent 4 months on Weston. I'd flown to Portland twice, rebuilt their entire proposal structure after Derek had fumbled the first pitch, and closed them myself. "The Weston account," I repeated. One of the suits, a woman with silver earrings and a leather portfolio, glanced between us like she was watching something she shouldn't see. "Derek's handling the implementation phase. We've got it under control." Derek didn't look at me. He was studying something on the table, some document I couldn't see from where I stood. "Sure," I said. "Of course." I pulled the door shut behind me. My desk was on the 3rd floor, in the corner near the copy room. I'd moved there 6 years ago when I started at Mitchell and Associates, and somehow never moved anywhere else, even after Weston, even after the Harrington restructure, even after I'd brought in more client revenue than anyone else on my floor. Warren had mentioned corner offices before, always in that vague way. "We should talk about getting you set up somewhere with a view," and then never talked about it again. I sat down and pulled up my email. Nothing about a meeting, nothing about Weston, nothing about whatever Derek was handling. My phone buzzed. My mother. "Don't forget Sunday. We're doing brunch before the family photos." I typed back, "What family photos?" 3 dots. Then, for the holiday card, Diana asked everyone weeks ago. Diana was my mother's name. She'd started referring to herself in the 3rd person around me about 2 years ago, when I pointed out that she never texted me directly about family events, only through group chains where I was somehow always the last to know. "I don't remember being asked," I wrote. "Well, you're being asked now. 11 a.m., the house." I put my phone down. Through the glass wall of my corner, I could see the elevator doors open. Kyle stepped out, coffee in hand, talking loudly to someone behind him. He saw me looking and gave a little salute, like we were coworkers, like we were anything other than what we actually were. I'd been 7 when Warren Mitchell married my mother. Kyle was 2. Derek was 9. For the first few years, I'd tried everything. I shared my toys. I let Derek have first pick of the good Halloween candy. I sat quietly through Warren's speeches about teamwork and family and pulling together. I wanted them to like me. I wanted it so badly I could feel it like a bruise under my ribs. They never did. Not in any obvious way. Warren never yelled, never called me names, never hit me. But there were other things. The way he'd ruffle Derek's hair after a little league game but just nod at me when I showed him my report card. The way he'd tell stories about my boys at dinner parties and I'd be standing right there. The way he looked through me sometimes, like I was furniture he hadn't bought but was stuck with anyway. My mother noticed. I know she did. But she had a way of smoothing things over, of finding explanations that meant nobody had to change anything. "Warren's just not expressive, sweetheart. That's how men of his generation are." Or, "He shows love differently. You just have to learn to read him." I learned to read him, all right. What I read was that I would never be one of his. The Weston meeting ran another 45 minutes. I watched through the glass as the suits gathered their things, shook Derek's hand, shook Warren's hand. The woman with the silver earrings, she was clearly the senior person, patted Derek on the shoulder like he'd just done something impressive. I pulled up the Weston file on my computer. My name was all over it. Every email, every document revision, every signed proposal. That was my work. That was 4 months of late nights and early flights and learning everything about municipal water infrastructure that a person could possibly learn. Derek walked past my desk on his way out. "Good meeting?" I asked. He stopped. He had that smile he did, the one that looked friendly if you didn't know him. "Yeah, they love the implementation plan." The one I wrote. The one the team wrote, he shrugged. Dad wanted me to take point on client relations going forward. You know how he is about presentations. I presented to them in Portland, twice. Right, and they liked you. But this is the long-term relationship phase. Dad thinks, he paused, choosing his words. He thinks it's better to have someone they can really build with, long-term. I let that sit between us. Anyway, Derek said, I've got to run. I watched him go. 35 years old, and he still moved like a guy who'd never had to work for anything. Which, to be fair, he hadn't. Warren had handed him a VP title 3 years ago, not because Derek had earned it, but because Derek was his son. I was Warren's stepdaughter. I was also the reason the Weston account existed at all. I started drafting an email to Warren. Then I deleted it. Then I started again. Then I deleted that one too. What was I going to say? Hey, quick question. Why do you keep giving my work to Derek? I already knew the answer. I'd always known. Instead, I opened the Weston implementation file and started reviewing Derek's contributions. There weren't many. A few comments in the margins, some changes to the formatting. He'd moved a table from page 12 to page 8. This was what he was presenting to the clients. This was the implementation plan that Warren wanted him to take credit for. I saved a backup copy to my personal drive. I didn't know why exactly, just a feeling. The same feeling I'd had for years, the sense that someday I would need proof of things that everyone around me was determined to pretend weren't happening. Sunday came too fast. The house, Warren and my mother's house, the one I grew up in after she remarried, sat on a half-acre lot in the nice part of Ridgemont. 6 bedrooms, pool, 3-car garage. Warren had bought it when the company started taking off back when I was 10 or 11. I remembered the day we moved in. My mother had been so happy, walking through the empty rooms, touching the granite countertops like they were sacred. This is our fresh start, she'd said. Our new life. Our new life. Even then, I'd felt the strangeness of it. My old life, my father, our apartment in Bakersfield, the smell of his aftershave on Sunday mornings, had only ended 2 years before. To my mother, that was ancient history. To me, it was still raw. I pulled into the driveway behind Kyle's Mercedes. Derek's Range Rover was already there, along with Warren's Audi. The matching cars, the family fleet. I drove a Honda. Warren had offered to help with a car once, years ago, and I'd said no. Some instinct told me not to take things from him, to keep some separation. I didn't know if that instinct was wisdom or just stubbornness. My mother met me at the door. There you are, she said, like I was late. I was 5 minutes early. Come in, Linda's already setting up. Linda was the photographer. I followed my mother into the living room, where a backdrop had been arranged near the bay window. White screen, professional lighting. Warren stood near the fireplace, examining his cufflinks. Derek's wife, Courtney, was fussing with their daughter Emma's dress. Kyle was on his phone. Maggie, Warren said, not looking up. Good, we can get started. Actually, my mother said, we should wait a few minutes. Courtney's mother is running late. Courtney's mother? I looked at the setup, at the family arranged around the room. I didn't know outside family was included. Well, she's Emma's grandmother. So is my father's mother. Was she invited? The room went quiet. My grandmother, my father's mother, Ruth Price, was 84. She lived alone in the same house in Bakersfield where my father had grown up. I visited her twice a month when I could, more often when work allowed. She'd never been invited to anything at the Mitchell house, not once in 25 years. My mother's face did something complicated. Maggie, let's not. I'm just asking. Warren looked up from his cufflinks. This is a Mitchell family photo, for the Mitchell holiday card. And I'm part of the Mitchell family. You're Diana's daughter. Of course you're included. But my grandmother isn't. She isn't a Mitchell. Neither is Courtney's mother. Warren's jaw tightened. It was small, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. Courtney's mother is Emma's grandmother. She's in the picture for Emma. And Ruth Price is my grandmother. If we're including extended family, why isn't she here for me? Because, he stopped. I watched him reassemble his expression into something calmer. Because this is our family, the way we do things. If you have a problem with it, we can discuss it after. I don't have a problem with it, I said. I just wanted to understand the logic. There was no logic. There was only. Ruth Price was connected to my father, and my father was someone Warren had spent 25 years erasing. My father's name was never mentioned in this house. His photos had been removed from every album. His things had disappeared, one by one, until there was nothing left of him in any space my mother shared with Warren. The only pieces of Thomas Price that still existed were in Ruth's house, and in my memory. The photographer arrived. Courtney's mother arrived. We arranged ourselves in front of the backdrop, Warren and my mother in the center, Derek and Courtney with Emma on one side, Kyle on the other. I stood at the edge, where the photographer positioned me. Okay, everyone look here, big smiles. I smiled. I'd been smiling in these photos for 25 years. I was very good at it. Afterward, brunch. Someone had ordered from the same catering company they always used, silver trays of eggs Benedict and fruit and pastries spread across the dining room table. I fixed myself a plate and found a seat near the window, away from the main cluster of conversation. Kyle dropped into the chair beside me. He had that slightly glazed look he got when he'd been drinking the night before. So, he said, you hear about the expansion. What expansion? The Austin branch. Dad's finally pulling the trigger. I set my fork down. He's opening an Austin branch. Yeah, they signed the lease last week. Derek's going to run it. Derek's moving to Austin. No, Derek's going to run it remotely at first, and then they'll hire someone local. But the first year is going to be a lot of travel. Kyle picked at his eggs. That's why they wanted him to take over the Weston account, I think, getting him ready for more responsibility. I stared at him. No one told me about Austin. It was in the board meeting. I wasn't at the board meeting. Weren't you? I hadn't been at a board meeting in 8 months. Warren had stopped including me after I questioned one of his budget projections. He'd said we needed to keep things efficient and that my perspective would be incorporated separately. It never was. Kyle, I said slowly, how long has this Austin thing been in development? I don't know, 6 months maybe. They've been talking about it forever. 6 months. They'd been planning a major expansion for 6 months, and no one had mentioned it to me. Is there a reason I wasn't told? Kyle shrugged. I figured Dad told you. I don't keep track of who knows what. No, I thought. You don't keep track of anything. You show up, you collect your paycheck, you drive your Mercedes. That's your entire contribution to this family. But I didn't say that. I never said things like that. I just smiled and nodded and filed the information away alongside all the other information I'd collected over the years. Excuse me, I said. I need some air. I walked through the kitchen, past the catering staff packing up their equipment, and out the back door. The pool was covered for winter. The lawn furniture had been stored. The yard looked bare and expensive, like something from a real estate listing. My mother found me there 10 minutes later. What was that about? She asked. With the photographer. What was what about? The comment about Ruth. I looked at her. She was 62, still beautiful in that preserved way certain women achieve. She'd kept herself up carefully over the years. Warren's wife. That was her job now. That was who she'd become. I was asking a question, I said. Why isn't Grandma Ruth ever invited to anything? You know why? No, actually, I don't. My mother sighed. She sat down on the edge of a wrought iron chair, arranging her dress around her knees. It's complicated. Explain it to me. Warren and Ruth they never clicked. Even at the wedding, she made things difficult. She asked if you were sure about remarrying so quickly. That's not making things difficult. That's being concerned. She accused me of forgetting your father. Had you? My mother's face went very still. That's not fair. I'm not trying to be fair. I'm trying to understand. Dad's been dead for 27 years. Ruth is the only piece of him I have left, and she's never once been welcome in your house. This is Warren's house, too. He gets a say in who. Does he? Does he get a say in erasing my father from existence? No one's erasing. Where are the photos, Mom? She stopped. The photos from before, the wedding pictures, the pictures of Dad holding me when I was a baby. Where are they? They're in storage. I told you that years ago. We're in storage. I'd have to look. You've had 25 years to look. We sat in silence. Somewhere in the house, I could hear Emma's high voice, asking for more juice. The normal sounds of a normal family gathering. I don't want to fight with you, my mother said finally. Not today. I don't want to fight either. Then can we get through the holidays, please, without all this? I looked at her, my mother, the woman who'd raised me, who'd held me when I cried about my father, who'd promised me that Warren would never replace him. The woman who'd then spent the next 2 decades letting Warren do exactly that. Sure, I said, we can get through the holidays. She looked relieved. She always looked relieved when I backed down. That was our pattern. I would push, she would deflect, I would give up, and we would pretend nothing had happened. I was tired of the pattern, but I didn't know how to break it. 3 weeks later, I found out about the Harrington situation. I was reviewing quarterly numbers when Sandra Chen, one of the project coordinators, stopped by my desk with a stack of folders. Hey, she said, keeping her voice low. Did you hear about Harrington? The hotel chain. Yeah, they're pulling out. My stomach dropped. Harrington Hotels was one of our biggest clients. I'd managed their account for the first 2 years before Derek had been transitioned into the relationship. They represented almost 12% of our annual revenue. What do you mean, pulling out? They're moving to Brighton Associates. Apparently there were issues with the last audit. They weren't happy with the numbers. What issues? Sandra glanced around. I don't know exactly, but I heard Derek's name come up a lot. Of course she did, because this was how things always went. Derek would fumble something, and someone else would take the blame, and the company would lose business, and Warren would find a way to spin it as everybody's fault except his son's. When did this happen? The meeting was yesterday. Warren flew to Chicago to try to save it, but, she shrugged, didn't work. Why wasn't I told? Sandra gave me a look, the kind of look that said you know why. I think they're keeping it quiet for now, bad for morale. Right, morale. I spent the rest of the day pulling everything I could find on the Harrington account. The audit in question had been Derek's responsibility. He'd handled their books for the past 18 months, but the work had been sloppy. Discrepancies in the expense reports, mismatched invoice numbers, basic stuff that anyone with training should have caught. Anyone with training. Derek had never actually finished his accounting certification. Warren had hired him anyway, put him in charge of major accounts anyway, promoted him to VP anyway. Because that's what fathers did for their sons. That evening, I drove to Bakersfield. Ruth's house was small, a 2-bedroom bungalow with flower boxes in the windows. She'd lived there since 1962, through my grandfather's death, through my father's childhood, through everything that came after. The house was full of memories she refused to let go. She met me at the door with a cup of tea already in her hand. You look tired, she said. Long week. Sit down, tell me about it. I sat. The living room was exactly as it had always been. The brown velvet couch, the crocheted throw pillows, the wall of photos that my mother had removed from her own home. My father smiled out from a dozen frames. Here he was at graduation. Here he was holding me as a baby. Here he was with Ruth and my grandfather, the 3 of them squinting into the sun at some long-ago family picnic. Work trouble? Ruth asked. Something like that. That man giving you problems again. She never called Warren by name. It was always that man or your mother's husband, or, on bad days, him. Not directly, it's just, I stopped. How did I explain it? The accumulation of 1,000 small cuts, none of them quite bad enough to point to, all of them adding up to something unbearable. I think I'm getting pushed out. Ruth's eyes sharpened. Pushed out how? They're not including me in meetings. Derek's taking over my accounts. There's a whole expansion happening that no one told me about. And what does your mother say? What she always says, that I'm overreacting, that Warren cares about me in his own way, that I need to be patient. Ruth set down her tea. She was 84, but her mind was as sharp as it had ever been. Sharp enough to have seen through Warren from the beginning. Sharp enough to have warned my mother, all those years ago, that marrying him so quickly was a mistake. Your father, she said slowly, would not have let this happen. He's not here. No, he's not. She looked at the wall of photos. But he loved you very much, Maggie, more than anything in the world. I hope you know that. I know. And he was a careful man, a planning man. He didn't like loose ends. I wasn't sure what she meant by that. Ruth sometimes talked about my father in a way that suggested she knew things she wasn't saying. But when I pressed her, she always changed the subject. I should go, I said. It's getting late. You should come back for Christmas. I always come back for Christmas. I mean for the whole day, not just a quick visit before you drive to that man's house. I hesitated. Christmas at the Mitchell house was a command performance. Warren expected everyone there for the full production. The tree, the presents, the family dinner. I'd never missed it, not once. I'll think about it, I said. Ruth nodded. She walked me to the door, her hand steady on my arm. Your father was proud of you, she said. Whatever happens, remember that. I will. I drove home in the dark, thinking about my father, Thomas Price. He'd died when I was 5, a car accident on the 99, a truck driver who'd fallen asleep at the wheel. I barely remembered him, just fragments. The smell of his coffee in the mornings, the sound of his voice reading me bedtime stories, the way he'd swing me up onto his shoulders and call me his little captain. My mother had remarried 2 years later. Warren had been a client of hers. She'd been working as an accountant back then, and he'd pursued her with the kind of single-minded focus that she'd mistaken for love. Maybe it was love, in his way, or maybe it was just that he wanted something and he got it. He'd gotten my mother. He'd gotten a ready-made family, and he'd spent the next 25 years making it clear that he only really wanted half of it. December arrived cold and gray. The office felt strange, like something was shifting under the surface that I couldn't quite see. People stopped talking when I walked into rooms. Derek avoided eye contact. Even Warren, who usually ignored me with practiced ease, seemed to be watching me more than usual. I found out why on December 15th. I was in the break room, refilling my coffee, when I heard voices in the hallway. Warren and Derek, coming from the direction of Warren's office. Handled the transition, Warren was saying. She'll understand. She won't understand. She's been here longer than I have. She's been here as an employee. That's different. Is it? Derek, Warren's voice dropped to the tone he used when he wanted to end a conversation. This has always been about legacy, about what I'm leaving behind. Maggie's not part of that. She never was. I stood very still. Mom's not going to like it, Derek said. Your stepmother will do what I tell her. She always has. They walked past the break room without seeing me. I watched them go, my coffee cooling in my hands. She's not part of that. She never was. I'd always known. On some level, I'd always known. But hearing it said out loud, hearing Warren state it as simple fact, like describing the weather, something shifted in me. Some last piece of hope I hadn't realized I was carrying finally let go. That night, I called my mother. I need to ask you something, I said, and I need you to tell me the truth. Maggie, it's late. What is Warren planning to do about the company? Silence. Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. I heard him, today, talking to Derek about legacy, about what he's leaving behind, about how I'm not part of it. More silence, then, it's complicated. Uncomplicate it. He's been thinking about succession planning. Who takes over when he retires? It's normal business stuff. And the answer is Derek. Derek is his son. I'm your daughter. I've worked at that company for 6 years. I've brought in more clients than anyone except Warren himself, and I'm not even being considered. It's not that simple. Then explain how it works. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I've spent 6 years building something that's never going to belong to me. My mother's voice got very quiet. He's his son, Maggie. Blood matters to Warren, you know that. What about what matters to you? Don't put me in the middle of this. You've been in the middle of this for 25 years. You've just always picked the same side. I hung up before she could respond. Christmas Eve. The Mitchell house was decorated to perfection. White lights lined the eaves. A 12-foot tree stood in the living room, professionally decorated. Evergreen garlands draped every surface. It looked like a catalog. It always looked like a catalog. I arrived at 6. The rest of the family was already there. Derek and Courtney with Emma, Kyle with his latest girlfriend, Brittany, Whitney. I'd lost track, Warren in his usual spot by the fire, my mother fluttering between the kitchen and the living room with the energy of someone performing hostess. Maggie, Warren said, good, we can eat. Dinner was catered. It always was. We sat around the formal dining table, the one my mother had picked out when they first moved in, the one that cost more than my first car, and made polite conversation about nothing that mattered. The weather, traffic, Kyle's plans to maybe go back to school, Emma's dance recital. I sat between my mother and Kyle's girlfriend, eating my prime rib, saying almost nothing. No one seemed to notice. After dinner, we gathered in the living room for presents. This was Warren's favorite part, the ritual of watching people open things he'd bought them, the demonstration of his generosity. He always bought expensive gifts, watches, jewelry, electronics, things that showed he had money. Derek got a Rolex. Kyle got new golf clubs. Courtney got diamond earrings. Emma got approximately $800 worth of toys she was too young to appreciate. My mother got a trip to Paris. First class, luxury hotel, the works. She cried. Warren looked pleased with himself. I got a gift card, $500 to Williams-Sonoma. You're always talking about cooking, Warren said, watching me open it. Figured you could use some new equipment. I didn't talk about cooking. I didn't cook at all, actually. I ate takeout most nights because I was too busy working to do anything else. But I smiled and said thank you, because that's what I always did. After the presents, we had coffee and dessert. Everyone was relaxed now, the formal part of the evening over. Kyle and his girlfriend were whispering something to each other. Derek was showing Emma something on his phone. Courtney was talking to my mother about curtains. Warren stood up. Before we call it a night, he said, I want to make an announcement. The room quieted. My mother looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. As you all know, Warren continued, I've been thinking about the future of Mitchell and Associates, about what happens when I'm ready to step back, about legacy. He paused, looking around the room like a king surveying his domain. I've made my decision. When the time comes, the company will pass to Derek and Kyle, equally, 50-50. Derek nodded, like this was expected. Kyle looked surprised and pleased. He'd never shown any interest in the company, but free ownership was free ownership. What about Maggie? My mother asked. Everyone looked at me. I sat very still. Maggie's done excellent work for us, Warren said, and she'll always have a job at Mitchell and Associates if she wants one. But the company itself, the ownership, that's for my sons. He said it so simply, so finally, like he was describing something obvious, something that had already been decided long ago. Derek was nodding. Kyle was grinning. My mother's face had gone very pale, but she wasn't saying anything. Of course she wasn't. Any questions? Warren asked. No, I said. My voice sounded strange to me, very far away. No questions. Warren smiled. Good, then Merry Christmas, everyone. I drove home in silence. No music, no phone calls, just the highway and the dark and the replaying loop of Warren's voice in my head. She's not part of that. She never was. When I got home, I sat in my car for a long time before going inside. My apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, a galley kitchen, but it was mine. I'd bought it 3 years ago with money I'd saved, money I'd earned, money that had nothing to do with Warren Mitchell or his legacy. That night, I made a decision. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew I was done pretending, done performing loyalty for people who'd never seen me as family, done hoping that if I just worked hard enough, proved myself enough, I'd finally be accepted. 25 years was long enough. The call came on December 28th. I was at my apartment, still in the strange post-Christmas limbo where time doesn't feel quite real, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Price. Yes. My name is Harold Brennan. I'm a forensic accountant with Brennan and Associates. I was retained many years ago by your father, Thomas Price. I sat down. I'm sorry, I said. My father died 27 years ago. Yes, ma'am, I'm aware. However, I was given very specific instructions regarding certain documents in my possession. Instructions that were to be executed only under particular circumstances. What circumstances? If, at any point, your stepfather, Warren Mitchell, abandoned you financially, socially, or professionally. The room felt very still. I received word from a source last week about an announcement made at a family gathering. A decision regarding company ownership that excluded you entirely. According to my instructions, that constitutes abandonment. Wait, I said. Who told you about the announcement? How did you? I'm not at liberty to disclose that, ma'am. What I can tell you is that your father anticipated this possibility. He was a careful man, a planning man. A planning man. That's what Ruth had called him too. I need to meet with you, Harold Brennan said. In person, there are documents you need to see. What kind of documents? The kind that change everything, Ms. Price. Harold Brennan's office was in an old building downtown, the kind with brass fixtures and wood paneling that smelled like decades of legal history. He was older than I expected, mid-70s, maybe, with white hair and wire-rimmed glasses and the steady demeanor of someone who'd spent his whole life working with numbers. He offered me coffee. I declined. I'm going to start at the beginning, he said, because I suspect much of this will be new to you. Okay. He opened a folder on his desk. Your father, Thomas Price, died in 1997, but before his death, he'd built a substantial investment portfolio. He was particularly good at identifying early-stage companies with growth potential. I didn't know that. My mother never talked about his business. No, she wouldn't have. The bulk of your father's investments were structured to be invisible to her. Why? Harold paused. Your father loved your mother, but he wasn't naive. He knew that if something happened to him, she would likely remarry, and he wanted to ensure that you, his daughter, would be protected regardless of who she married. Protected how? Harold slid the folder across the desk. In 1995, your father made a significant investment in a small accounting firm called Mitchell Associates. Warren Mitchell was the founder. He was ambitious, talented, but chronically undercapitalized. Your father provided the money he needed to grow. I stared at the folder. In exchange, Harold continued, your father received a 70% ownership stake, silent ownership. Warren handled the operations, made the decisions, built the company, but the majority share, the actual ownership, belonged to your father. 70%. Yes, and upon your father's death, that ownership transferred to a trust held in your name. I couldn't speak. You've owned 70% of Mitchell and Associates since 1997, Ms. Price. Warren has been running what amounts to your company for the past 27 years. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the arms of my chair. That's not possible, I said. Someone would have told me, my mother. Your mother doesn't know. No one knows except myself and my partner, who has since passed. Your father was very specific about secrecy. He didn't want Warren to feel undermined, didn't want to create conflict while you were growing up. He believed that if Warren raised you well, treated you fairly, none of this would ever need to come to light. But if Warren abandoned me, then you were to receive full documentation of your ownership, along with instructions for how to proceed. Harold slid another document across the desk. It was a legal summary, dense with corporate language, but I could follow the broad strokes. Ownership structure, voting rights, authority over major decisions. What exactly does this mean? I asked. It means that when you choose to exercise your ownership, you have the legal authority to make decisions about Mitchell and Associates, including decisions about who runs it, who works there, what happens to the company's future. I read the document again and again. Warren doesn't know, I said slowly. He has no idea. No, your father structured everything through offshore holding companies and silent partnerships. Warren believes his only investors are two venture capital firms who have never shown interest in day-to-day operations. Those firms are controlled by the trust, which is controlled by you. I sat back in my chair. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my position in the family, about Warren's company, about my own powerlessness, was wrong. My father hadn't abandoned me. He'd been protecting me this entire time, from beyond the grave, for 27 years. What do I do now? I asked. Harold folded his hands on the desk. That, Ms. Price, is entirely up to you. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I read through every document Harold had given me, the investment records, the trust structure, the corporate filings that traced ownership through a maze of holding companies back to a single name, Margaret Ellen Price. My father had named the trust after me. He'd set it up when I was 3 years old, before he died, before any of this happened. He'd planned for a future he wouldn't live to see. A planning man. The next morning, I called Ruth. I need to ask you something, I said, about Dad. What about him? Did he ever talk to you about his investments, about a company called Mitchell Associates? A long pause, then, you spoke to Harold Brennan. You knew. I knew Harold existed. I didn't know the details. Your father told me that if anything ever went wrong, truly wrong, there was a plan. He made me promise not to interfere, not to tell you, not to do anything until the plan activated on its own. And you kept that promise for 27 years. It wasn't easy. Her voice cracked slightly. Watching that man treat you the way he did, knowing something was there but not being able to reach for it. But your father knew what he was doing. He always knew. I closed my eyes. What are you going to do, Maggie? I don't know yet. I need time to think. Don't think too long. That man doesn't deserve another day of thinking he won. I thought about it for 2 weeks. Not because I was uncertain. I knew what I wanted, but because I wanted to do it right. I didn't want revenge for its own sake. I wanted justice. I wanted my father's legacy to mean something. I wanted Warren to face the consequences of his own choices. I also wanted to see his face when he found out. The board meeting was scheduled for January 15th. Quarterly review. All major stakeholders were supposed to attend, which I now knew included me. I sent my RSVP through Harold, using the official communication channels of the holding companies my father had established. Warren didn't know who was coming. He just knew that the silent investors who'd never shown any interest before had suddenly requested a seat at the table. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully. Navy suit, my mother's old pearls, the ones she'd worn when she was married to my father, and flat shoes I could stand in for hours if necessary. The conference room was full when I arrived. Warren at the head of the table, Derek to his right, a row of executives I vaguely recognized from company events, and 2 empty chairs at the far end, reserved for the mysterious investor representatives. Harold was already in one of them. I took the other. Warren looked up. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, recognition, irritation, confusion again. Maggie, what are you doing here? I'm representing the majority stakeholder, I said. The majority, he stopped. What are you talking about? Harold opened his briefcase. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Harold Brennan. I represent the Price Family Trust, which holds controlling interest in Mitchell and Associates through the holding companies Meridian Capital and Westbrook Investments. Warren's face drained of color. Those are venture capital firms. They've always been shells, Mr. Mitchell, vehicles for the trust's investment. An investment made by Thomas Price in 1995. Thomas Price is dead. He is, but his trust is very much alive, and its sole beneficiary has reached the age of majority and chosen to assert her ownership rights. Warren looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw something like fear in his eyes. 70%, I said. My father owned 70% of this company. Now I do. The room had gone completely silent. Derek was staring at me with his mouth slightly open. The executives were frozen, unsure whether to look at Warren or at me or at the documents Harold was now spreading across the table. That's impossible, Warren said. I built this company from nothing. I built it. You built it with my father's money, my father's capital, my father's silent partnership. I never knew. You never asked where the money came from, never wondered why investors with that much stake never showed up, never demanded anything. They said they were hands-off. They were waiting. My father set it up that way. He wanted to see what kind of man you were, what kind of father you'd be to his daughter. I let that sit for a moment. I guess now we all know the answer. Warren's hands were shaking. This can't be legal. It's completely legal. Harold has spent 27 years making sure of that. I looked at Derek. Your inheritance announcement at Christmas, the one where you clapped while your father told me I'd never be part of his legacy. Derek's face had gone pale. This is his legacy now. A company he built on someone else's money, someone else's vision. A company he was planning to hand to sons who never earned it, while the person who actually owns it served coffee in the break room. Maggie, my mother's voice. I hadn't even noticed her arrive. She was standing in the doorway, her face white. What is this? This is Dad, Mom. This is what he left me. Not Williams-Sonoma gift cards and seats at the edge of the family photo. This. I don't understand. Neither did I for 27 years. I didn't understand why I never felt like I belonged here. Why Warren looked through me. Why you let him erase Dad from every corner of our lives. I stood up. But it turns out Dad knew exactly what was going to happen, and he made sure I'd have a choice. What kind of choice? I looked at Warren. He was gripping the edge of the table like he might fall over without it. The choice to walk away and take the company with me, or the choice to let all of you keep pretending this family was ever real. The fallout took weeks to fully unfold. Warren tried to fight it. Of course he did. He hired lawyers, challenged the documentation, claimed fraud and manipulation and everything else he could think of. But Harold had spent 27 years preparing for exactly this. The paperwork was airtight. The trust was unassailable. My father had built a fortress around his daughter's future, and Warren couldn't find a single crack in the walls. By February, the legal battles were over. Mitchell and Associates, now Price and Associates as I'd renamed it, belonged to me in every way that mattered. Warren retained his 30% stake, but he had no operational control. Every decision went through me. Every hire, every contract, every expansion plan. Including the Austin branch. I canceled it, not because it was a bad idea, it wasn't, but because Derek had been planning to run it, and Derek no longer worked for the company. I'd offered him a position, entry-level, same as everyone else, with a chance to prove himself, and he'd refused. I'm not going to work for you, he'd said. This is wrong, this whole thing is wrong. Then good luck finding something else. Kyle didn't even bother to show up for the conversation. He'd already moved to his mother's place in Arizona, living off whatever savings he'd accumulated from years of collecting paychecks for work he never did. My mother called me 3 times in the first week after the announcement. I didn't answer. She left voicemails, confused, pleading, angry by turns, but I didn't listen to those either. I was done being the person who absorbed everyone else's feelings while ignoring my own. Eventually, she showed up at my apartment. You have to talk to me, she said. I'm your mother. You were my mother. Then you became Warren's wife. Those seem to be different jobs. That's not fair. You knew how he treated me. For 25 years, you watched him overlook me, exclude me, push me aside. And you did nothing. I didn't know what else to do. He was my husband. And I was your daughter. Dad knew you'd choose Warren. That's why he set all of this up. Because he knew I'd need protection from the family you built without me. She started crying. I let her. I didn't comfort her. I can't fix the last 25 years, I said. And I'm not going to pretend they didn't happen so you can feel better about yourself. But if you want to be part of my life going forward, really part of it, you're going to have to choose. Choose what? Who you are, Warren's wife or my mother, because you can't keep being both. She left without answering. 3 months later, Ruth died. It was peaceful, in her sleep, the way she always said she wanted. I was with her at the end, holding her hand while the hospice nurses moved quietly around us. Your father would be proud of you, she said near the end. You know that, right? I know. And I'm proud of you, every day, every single day. I buried her next to my father, in the cemetery in Bakersfield, where the Price family had been laying their dead for 3 generations. My mother came to the funeral. We didn't speak, but she stood at the edge of the gathering, watching, and I saw something in her face I hadn't seen before. Regret, maybe, or something like it. 6 months after the board meeting, Warren had a heart attack. He survived, but barely. The doctors said stress was a factor. Apparently having your entire life's work exposed as borrowed glory wasn't good for the cardiovascular system. I didn't visit him in the hospital. Derek did. Kyle flew in from Arizona. My mother sat by his bedside for a week, feeding him ice chips and adjusting his pillows. I ran the company. I restructured the management team, promoting Sandra and 2 other people who'd been overlooked for years. I implemented profit sharing for employees. I donated 10% of annual revenue to scholarships for first-generation college students, my father's people, the kind of background Warren had always looked down on. The company thrived, better than it ever had under Warren. Not because I was smarter than him, I wasn't, but because I actually valued the people who worked there. I wasn't building a monument to my own ego. I was building something that mattered. The last time I saw Warren was at a company event, almost a year after the board meeting. He'd been released from the hospital but moved slowly now, aged 20 years in 12 months. He came up to me near the end of the evening, Derek hovering behind him like a bodyguard. I want to talk to you, he said. So talk. I was wrong. The words came out rusty, like they'd been stored somewhere uncomfortable. About you, about all of it. Yes, you were. Your father was a good man. He was. I should have. He stopped. I watched him struggle with something, some admission he couldn't quite get out. You should have what? Seen you, he said finally, for who you are, not just as Diana's daughter, the thing you got stuck with when you married my mother. He flinched, but he nodded. I don't need your apology, I said, and I don't forgive you, but you already know that. What do you need? I thought about it for a moment. I need you to live with what you did, every day. I need you to wake up and remember that you built your legacy on stolen ground. I need you to see my father's name on this company and know that everything you were so proud of, everything you were planning to hand to your sons, was never really yours. Warren's face crumbled, just slightly. Then he straightened, pulling himself together the way he always did. That's not fair, he said. No, I agreed. It's not, but it's what happened. I walked away. Behind me, I could hear Derek's voice, low and urgent. Dad, come on, let's go. The exit doors were straight ahead. Beyond them, the parking lot, my car, the rest of my life. I pushed through and didn't look back. The offices were quiet this late on a Friday. Most people had gone home hours ago, but I liked the building when it was empty, all that potential, all that history waiting in the silence. I was finishing up some contracts when my phone buzzed. A text from Ruth's old neighbor, who'd been helping me sort through her house. Found another box. Photos, looks like, some papers. You want me to hold on to it or send it over? Send it, I typed back. I want to see everything. I stood up and walked to the window. The city stretched out below, lights coming on as darkness fell. In the reflection, I could see my father's name on the door behind me, Price and Associates. Not Mitchell, not anymore. The elevator dinged. A cleaning crew member waved as she passed with her cart. I turned back to my desk, pulled the contracts closer, and got back to work. That's it for today's story. Dear listeners, it really helps to know that someone out there is listening. So if this is resonating with you in any way, or if it simply caught your attention, please let me know in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, or just say hello. There's something incredibly comforting about knowing I'm not alone in this. Thanks a lot. See you next time.